Hey everybody, it's Curtis. I'm back in the garage giving you guys a review. Today we're going to be focusing on the ISOLATOR from Bulletproof Fitness. The ISOLATOR is a single piece of equipment whose intent is to consolidate a whole bunch of different isolation type exercises and condense it down into a single machine that can fit into a normal garage gym. The ISOLATOR is compatible with a whole host of different racks and stands. That's going to include your 2x3, 3x3 inch. Additionally, it's going to encompass your 2x2 inch, and it's available in 1 inch pins, 11/16 inch pins, 3/4 inch pins, or 1/2 inch pins, depending on what you require. The actual frame of the unit, you can see that I have mine in black here, but you can also option that to be in white. As you can see, I have the black padding as well, so like that's black pads here on the main isolation table pivot thing, as well as the leg rollers. You can also option that out to be available in red. Now, although 2 frame choices and 2 pad color choices can seem a little bit limiting, what I found is that they actually did a good job selecting. If you're only gonna have 2 colors available in each option, they did a good job picking colors that are very compatible with most home gym color schemes. I'm going to cover the base unit and what it all comes with, because this is an attachment of attachments. So with the base unit, you're going to get the carriage assembly, which is actually back here. Attached to the front of the carriage assembly is the main rotation assembly, and we have the 360-degree arm that's for the attachments. You also have 2 options to select height for your isolation table pivot excellence tool, and you also have a long pad, a short pad, and you have this really cool and very overbuilt either bicep curl, tricep extension, rotating handle assembly that also has 3 different attachment points on it. And again, this is a machine of machines, an attachment that has attachments. This thing is the Transformer 5000 of the world. Now, I will say it comes with a lot of parts and pieces, and there's a lot of adjustments that you can make throughout the entire thing. But at the end of the day, what I ended up using the most was the isolation table, the long pad, and the curl attachment, as well as the weight horn and the weight load bearing arm. Now, the short pad is sitting over there in the end because I had to go find it for the review, and it's currently super dusty. I just personally never used it, although there are a lot of great videos showing use. So to break this unit down, I'm going to break it down into smaller pieces and talk about each piece, its pros and cons as we move throughout. The first piece we're going to break down is the carriage assembly. Now, the carriage assembly is a very heavy duty and UHMW line carriage assembly. It is open on the back end, which makes it easy to put on and off of a rack, or at least easy in concept. We'll talk about the weight later. It attaches to an upright using 2 pins and then has tensioners that push onto the UHMW lining, and that presses up against the upright and removes any slop that may be there from it being an open face unit. It's just going to have that little bit of slop that makes it simple to put on and off. On the back of the carriage assembly, there's a small pin that has a piece of plastic that basically goes there and acts as a roller of sorts. So if you're going to move this thing up and down the rack, that roller just makes it a little bit easier because you don't have to worry about the alignment of the holes. You can just grab the handle that is attached to the carriage assembly and you can pull up and down. The business end of the carriage assembly is attached to the face of the carriage using 4 hex bolts that go through and basically attach this rotating arm. This rotating arm is where all of the business happens. As I alluded to earlier, it is a very heavy duty unit, and because it's a heavy duty attachment that takes tons of other attachments, it's going to be loaded with hundreds of pounds. It is very heavy in weight. What this does is it really puts me in a position where, as the lifter, I tend to want a very easy setup. So what I did is I found a height that works for me. Now, I have used this on the solo stand like you see here, but I've also used it the most attached to my power rack and basically had it dedicated to an upright. Now, one area that is different in my setup compared to other people's setups that I have seen on the Instagrams is that I basically set it up so that I faced perpendicular to my rack rather than facing into my rack. What I found that this did for me is it made it a lot simpler when I was setting up to do other movements. For instance, if I wanted to put my bench up to my power rack, up to the isolator specifically, and extend the bench pad so I could do leg extensions or prone leg curls, I found that by setting it up sideways, I was able to get a better setup, simpler and faster. So using trial and error, putting my bench up to this unit and taking it away, because I do use my adjustable bench in tandem with my isolator quite a bit, I found a height that works really well for me. And since I had it on the solo stand or on the actual upright of my power rack, the amount of times that I move it up and down is almost zero. I feel like where most home gym owners, space is a big issue. So if you take this and you put it on your rack, you're probably going to put it at a particular height and you're not going to touch it. Something to keep in mind though is that because of the size of the unit, even with all the attachments taking off, it does have a habit of kind of getting in the way. Specifically, the one unit I always tended to hit on this attachment was this extender sleeve over here for the hex port that is currently holding the small pad that I never really use. And I actually had a failed lift because of it at one point because I didn't walk the bar out far enough. And when I brought the weight down, the weight actually hit this post and I tipped backwards into the safety arms. Now, thank goodness the safety arms were there. And in hindsight, I probably could have done a little bit longer of a walkout, but just something to keep in mind. Now, Garage Gym Experiment has been talking a long time about how most home gyms could really benefit from having a dedicated power rack, but also an accessory rack. Now, that's where the solo stand came in for me, and it was a huge lifesaver. I'm going to review the solo stand by itself in a separate video, but since moving this thing to the solo stand, I have found that I really do appreciate it a lot more than when it was on my upright. And again, the big reason for that is because when it's on your upright, it's there, it's very big. You want to leave it set up because it's kind of a pain in the butt to set up, but it gets in the way. Part of the reason that it's a pain to actually adjust up and down is because instead of a normal carriage assembly for like a trolley arm, which uses rollers, this just has the UHMW shims and then the one guide roller that keeps it in place. Because of that, there's a lot of friction inside of the carriage assembly, and even when you loosen those thumb screws all the way, it's just one of those things where it's a pain in the butt, so you're gonna tend to not pick the movements that require you to move it around. That is one area where I could see a little bit of improvement in the product design, but really we're splitting hairs at that point because this thing performing with the UHMW is great. You're able to take up that tension, and I don't know how you would be able to remove that slop if you were to introduce side rollers into this assembly. Now, all the attachments use this patented hex port technology in order to get the attachments on and off. So here, as I pull the pad off, basically you can see that there's a hex port and there's two hex port sleeves. Depending on the movement that you're doing is going to dictate which sleeve your attachments go in, and they go in and secure both with a pop pin so that even if you just put them in without tightening the tensioner down, you are still secure and that the attachment isn't going to come off. So if you're like me and sometimes you forget to tighten the tensioner, or maybe you just don't care, that's fine because you're going to be safe in lifting. Now, you should tighten the tensioner down. And when you do, it basically eliminates most of the slop that's in that joint. Now, I will say that as you start to use this with the hex port technology, the ease in use tends to have some sort of trade-off. So in this case, it is just a little bit of extra movement inside of that. Now, this is a very large attachment, but all of these attachments wiggle ever so slightly inside of that hex port. That doesn't mean that it doesn't work well. It just means that it's a trade-off. So in order to make it easy to adjust, there has to be a little bit of slop to it. Now, as you first start to use the unit, what you might find is that as you sit on it, maybe you think it's moving a lot, and in reality, it actually is moving a little bit, but it doesn't take away from the functionality of the movement itself. So first, we're gonna talk about the attachment arm, and I'm going to put it up like this so you can see, but basically, if I come in here and I remove the leg roller assembly and I place that on the ground out of the way, we have this hex port, and this is the basic hex port. There is an upgraded version, but what you have is 3 different tensioners that take out a little bit more of the slop, and then you have a pull pin with a tensioner built in. And what you have is the ability to actually move this all the way down to the bottom and all the way up to the top. And depending on what movement that you're performing or your anthropometry as far as like your leg length, all of those kind of factors can be dealt with and mitigated to produce good quality movements, regardless of what you're really trying to do. The attachment arm also has the ability to go almost 360 degrees. Where it tends to get in the way is if you have anything set up here, like I have this main pad set up here, so you're not going to get quite 360 degrees, but as you can see, you do get quite a bit of motion. And if I had this attachment, if I had this hex port attachment actually put where it should go, you can see that it goes even further. So again, here from about the, we'll call it the 7 o'clock position, all the way up and around to about the 8 o'clock position. So you're getting almost 360 degrees, limited only by an attachment being right here. Now the pop pin that's on the attachment arm is made out of metal, which is really nice. It's a high quality pop pin. My only complaint about it is that occasionally I find that I can accidentally start to work the actual handle portion off. And that can cause the pop pin to fall out, like I just made it fall out there. Now, whether this is just because I'm, pulling on it, or because my kids are coming out in the gym and they find things that twist and they twist them, I'm not exactly sure. But if you are concerned about that, like I should be, you can always Loctite it, or you can just kind of feel on whether or not it's rotating and adjust from there. The other pop pins that are on this unit honestly leave a little bit as far as what I'd like to see. These are a standard kind of plastic handled pop pin that have the ability to come in and out, rotate, and also apply tension. That tension allows it to not move around. My main issue comes in with some of these kind of grinding up. And as you use them more and more, you can kind of grind on those plastic gears, especially if you kind of anticipate tightening it before it actually gets all the way seated. And as a result, you can grind some out. Now, with that critique being said, I have yet to create any pop pins that don't work. I just know that there's some where as I tighten it down, it kind of grinds a little bit. So that's it for the attachment arm. I'd like to move on now to the hex port adapters that are attached to the backside of the carriage assembly. And what I find is that there are two options here. Essentially, you're going to have one that's geared more towards lower body, which is going to be the lower one for me. And then the other one, which is on the top, which makes it easy to remember, is geared more towards upper body. Again, the big difference here is when you think about setting this unit up using the isolation pad, this big flat pad, you want to place the joint that is working through that isolation exercise so that the hinge of that movement matches up with the hinge of the apparatus. So if you sit on this, like you're going to do a leg extension, you'll notice that my knee is in line with this arm, which is going to make it to where the unit can operate the way it needs to operate, and you're not having one of those situations where like your roller, like if I were to drop the angle here, like now the roller is kind of like rolling up and down my shin and the actual unit is not operating in line with the joint that I'm currently exercising. Again, to demonstrate this even further, if I was to take the leg roller out and install the curl attachment, if I'm in the lower hole, what we have is a situation where my elbow is actually significantly below this plane of rotation. Now you can make it work, but you're going to kind of hit that block and your arm is going to have to go into a weird position in order to compensate. But if you use the upper hex port sleeve, which is easy to adjust and get into, what you find is that because now my elbow joint is directly in line with the joint of rotation on the isolator, is that you're able to do a much better high quality movement that you're not having to put your body in a weird position to get into. Also, it's very easy to adjust up and down. I mean, I just did it while recording a video, so how hard could it really be? Now the isolation pad, I should probably look up the actual name on that. Now the isolation pad rotates in 360 degrees so that you could also do things like calf raises. So you could take this isolation pad off, put it onto this attachment, and then you can put the arm out over there and you can place this on your knees and perform calf raises. The imagination here is going to be something that you really need, but just understanding that this goes 360 degrees makes it so that you can use it for a plethora of different movements and also make those movements high quality by dialing in where everything needs to be set up. The next arm I want to talk about is actually the arm that you're going to attach your weight pin to. Now, this does come disassembled. It slides into position and is secured in using 2 of the tensioning pop pins that I talked about earlier. Once you have this set in place, I have never had a need to take it off. Now, this extends down, and then you actually have your weight horn, which is attached using just a single pop pin, and it can be oriented sideways like I have mine oriented, or you can orient it facing outwards. That's all going to depend on how you want the load to feel when you're moving it. What I have found personally, just from my experience, and I haven't verified this with any sort of scientific equipment like a scale, but I find that if I load it this way, I tend to get a lot more load at the end of the movement versus at the beginning of the movement. And if I load it to the side, it's a lot more even throughout the entire movement itself. You can also make the load feel a little bit lighter or a little bit heavier just using this lever. By bringing the load closer to the pivot point, you're actually making the range that it has to travel a lot less, thereby reducing the amount of felt load in the hands. Moving the weight horn up and down is available going to the side or going to the front, and is also really helpful when you have an obstruction that's in the way. For instance, you might be in a position where you have to set your entire isolator up so that it is a little bit lower, and if you were to have it crashed all the way to the ground, your weight plates would be hitting the ground. But by having the horn adjustable so you can just move it back up, it makes it a lot easier when you're trying to perform that movement, and you can get a bigger range of motion. One other really cool hack that has to do with the arm itself is that you can actually extend the amount of rotation that you get. Now, there is this rubber starting block in the bottom of the arm, and let's say that you need to get just that extra little bit of rotation. You can actually remove this rubber block that would normally catch the weight at about here, and it can slam all the way back. And that gives you just that little bit extra bit of rotation on the joint. Again, I've kind of played with this. I've popped it off occasionally for certain movements. I find personally that I don't really need it, but the option is there. And it's also something that they thought about in the design, because you can see where they put the crash pad here, so that if you're not using this crash pad, you still have something that's protecting your upright from getting smoked by that arm on the way down. First, what we have is the leg roll assembly, and the leg roller assembly is a 3/16 piece of plastic as a stop that has the hex port assembly here at the end. And if you pull down the pad, you can see that the way that it rotates so freely on this metal rod that goes all the way through to this metal end cap at the very end. The reason it rotates so freely is because it's actually a piece of polyvinyl carbonate, or PVC, that the pad is actually rolling on. It's made out of a really good durable material. It doesn't really get a memory that I have been able to detect. This thing is heavy duty enough to handle your heaviest leg extension, but also lightweight, easy to move around, and easy to install into the hex port adapters. It's a high quality piece, and I think it looks really good, and I really don't have any complaints with it. Next up after that is the curl, basically upper body attachment. That's what we'll call it. It has that same hex port, and that hex port is riding in on some bearings that go all the way through this entire area. It has 2 rubber coated handles, which honestly, that's one area that I really wish they had done this a little bit differently. Now, I know that Bulletproof is coming from the commercial gym setting, so having these rubber coated handles is something that is very common in the commercial gym setting, but I would be willing to bet that there's more people that wish that this was a knurled handle piece instead of a rubber coated handle piece. That slight little nuance aside, the handles are angled nicely so that you can come wide or come narrow. You can also get a very narrow hammer type curl if that's what you wanted to do. And it's also constructed in a way that when you put it into the hex port assembly, it has complete free range of motion going 360 degrees all the way around. Now, one thing I did find is that the gap in between the hex port adapter and the attachment itself, that when you tighten down the pop pin, it can create friction inside that joint to the point where it almost can stand up on its own. So like right there, the handle's not even rotating until the weight overcomes it right about there. So if I was going to create a little bit of improvement, I would actually probably gap that a little bit. Although I will also say that under load, it still rotates freely even when it's completely tightened down. The last attachment I want to talk about is actually the isolation main piece, which is going to be this big pad. Now this big pad is very heavy. Not very heavy, that's not fair. This big pad is well built for what it's designed to do. It's heavy enough, because it's heavy, it makes it sturdy so that you can use it with your full body weight on it for leg extensions and leg curls and those types of movements. It consists of that same 360-degree selectorized angle that allows you to put it in any position that you might need, and it has a giant tube that runs all the way down attached to a giant 3/16 inch steel plate underneath of a wood supported foam padded and well sewn piece. Now the foam itself is a high quality foam. This is one attachment where you do start to see a little bit of that memory being developed, especially where my arms come over the top when I'm doing bicep curls and also where I sit. Now I say it's heavy, but I can also support it with one hand, and it easily installs into the hex port assembly, and even without tightening down the tensioner, can completely support my body weight with me bouncing on it. A lot of the movement that you're seeing in it right now is just because I have it in the solo stand. When it's on the power rack, it's a lot less than that, and really on the solo stand, it's not enough that I'm not going to use it. One other thing I really like about it is that when I'm doing leg extensions, my body, which I'm not a small person, but I'm also not huge, but I tend to want a handle when I'm doing leg extensions. And when I have it tilted back and I'm doing that movement, I can grab the side of the seat pad, and it is also robust enough that I can basically use that as my handles and I feel secure to the pad. Now my experience using the Isolator is overall very positive. I found that it is a great addition to a gym, especially after you've already built a solid foundation of a bench, a rack, a barbell, and a whole bunch of plates. After you have that and you're looking to bring back a little bit more of that commercial isolation exercise feel to certain movements, then the Isolator can be a very good option. My biggest critique is that it is so big and comes with so many different attachments. As Joe Gray over at Gray Matter Lifting said, you get that paralysis by analysis as you set this thing up and down trying to get the perfect movement. What I find is that if you have a notebook or some sort of whiteboard in your gym, maybe use a Google Sheet training log, whatever you got to do to make it work, you need to get a good log going of where this needs to be set up. Now on that, another critique I have is that I really wish that there were numbered holes that went around on all of these different attachments, as well as numbered holes on the arms so that you can better dial in where things should be set up. If I was able to also articulate at what height that the leg attachment needed to be, as well as maybe what pin that this needed to be in, it could have made that a little bit easier. Now there are some difficulties with that because this 360-degree rotating arm could be set up in any number of different ways, so it could just be that it's not going to be the same as you put it on every time, but I just think it could be something that is nice. One option I am thinking about exploring is actually getting some custom plate snacks made for these arms so that I can have that reference point as far as one, which way is up, so we can put it on the same way every time. When you are trying to figure out what movements this thing works best for, what I tend to find is that in between sets, or if you even have kind of an off day, and if you're like me, you like to spend time in your gym anyways, come out and try to anticipate those movements and set it up. The biggest things that I use this for, and I absolutely love it for, is leg extensions, prone leg curls, bicep curls, and then tricep raises. I know that I can do a lot more than just those 4 movements, but those 4 movements can all be done with the actual carriage assembly set up at this height. I don't need to adjust it at all. And honestly, just having this thing replace what could be a leg extension leg curl machine is smaller, better priced, and works a little bit better in a lot of cases because it also can be applied to other movements like the bicep curl. Everything on the Isolator itself is very well made. It's obvious that even though it's an imported product, that there's a lot of attention to detail and a lot of quality control that goes into the manufacturing of this piece. And because of that, it gets an A+ in my book because it is a very fine-tuned piece of equipment. Basically, all I'm trying to say is that if you get the isolator, it's going to work really well for a core set of isolation exercises that you want to do in your home gym. And you can kind of play with it outside of that, but realistically, it's really good at doing the things that you do the most, and you got to dial those in from the beginning. But if you're like me and you just wanted an opportunity to get a leg extension, leg curl back into your training sessions, then just there alone, you are winning big time by using this piece of equipment, as long as you can put it out of the way. The other big advantage that the isolator offers over other types of attachments like this that are out there is because the attachment can be independently set up for a start position from the load. You're able to do a lot more movements with it. But that's been it for this review. Please tell me what you guys think down below. I could spend hours talking about this, and honestly, this is probably one of the longer reviews that I'll publish this year. But tell me what you guys think. Does the isolator have a place in your home gym? I appreciate each and every single one of you guys that watch these videos every week. And remember that when it comes to your gym and your training, and then making those accessory pieces that really make an effective workout, you should always keep it better, awesome, and of course, badass. I'll see you next time.